Abortion, the hot topic leading up to the Wisconsin primary, how the candidates define the issue. Trump questions NATO's value, how the White House defends the military alliance. Remembering a civil rights icon, Alveda King shares her uncle's legacy. And triple tribute to Mother Angelica. Her cousin, Father Patrick, and Scott Hahn recall last week's memorials. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, April 4th, 2016. Good evening. Thank you for joining us on this Feast of the Annunciation. I'm Brian Patrick. A day before Wisconsin's primary, life issues dominate the political debate. Jason Calvi is here with that story tonight.
Brian, if you would have watched the weekend talk shows, you would have seen the candidates facing tough questions about abortion. Donald Trump says the laws are set, while Hillary Clinton pushed her pro-abortion stance on NBC's Meet the Press.
Under Roe v. Wade, as you know, there is room for reasonable kinds of restrictions after a certain point in time.
Though Hillary Clinton hasn't said what abortion restrictions she'd support.
When or if does an unborn child have constitutional rights?
Well, under our laws currently, that is not something that exists. The unborn person doesn't have constitutional rights.
The frontrunners of both parties continue to answer hot-button abortion questions this weekend.
The laws are set now on abortion, and that's the way they're going to remain until they're changed.
Donald Trump on CBS's Face the Nation.
Meaning you'd want to change on
abortion? At this moment, the laws are set, and I think we have to leave it that way.
His spokeswoman says Trump means the laws won't change until he's president and appoints judges. All Republican candidates say they support banning most abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy. Ohio Governor John Kasich says the target of punishment shouldn't be the mothers.
Well, look, the pro-life and the pro-choice movement have said that that's where you look at, clinics or whatever, but you don't lay this on women. It's a tough enough situation for them. End of story.
In Wisconsin, Ted Cruz is up 4 points, that according to the Real Clear Politics average of polls. But Trump is predicting a really, really big win there. On the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders is ahead 2.5 points. Brian?
Jason, what have you heard in response to Hillary Clinton's comments on abortion?
Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, she says that it shows no compassion for the unborn child, and she says it may signal an intention to use executive action to block these even minimal protections of the unborn.
She did use the term unborn person. That was interesting. Thank you, Jason Calvi. Speaker of the House Paul Ryan is from Wisconsin, but he's far away from his home state, out of the country this week. Ryan makes his first trip abroad as Speaker. He joined a bipartisan delegation of lawmakers on a trip to Israel. He will meet with his counterpart, the Israeli Parliament Speaker. Ryan continues to repel rumors that Republicans could draft him to run for president at the convention. He says his young family takes priority over political ambitions. Ryan, who was on the Republican ticket 4 years ago with Mitt Romney, reluctantly accepted the powerful speaker's position late last year. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Amtrak service in the Northeast returns to normal today following Sunday's deadly derailment outside Philadelphia. A train collided with construction equipment. That crash killed 2 Amtrak workers and injured more than 30 passengers. That train was en route to Savannah, Georgia from New York City. Alaska Air plans to buy Virgin America for $2 billion. The deal would give Alaska Air a bigger presence in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Dallas. It also gives Alaska Air more access to airports in Washington, D.C. and New York City. NATO's Secretary General met today with President Obama. Chief White House correspondent Lauren Ashburn reports on what was discussed and why that meeting was held today.
Ryan, the White House says the meeting has been on the books since January, but it is timely. Just last week, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump called NATO obsolete. But the president affirmed that the U.S. is committed to ensuring NATO continues to uphold international order. High on the meeting agenda, defeating ISIS. North Atlantic Treaty Organization Secretary General Stoltenberg told the president NATO stands ready to provide support in Libya against ISIS and train troops in Iraq. We caught up with him on the North Lawn where he made his case for the importance of NATO.
We stand together in the fight against terrorism. Terrorism affects us all, from Brussels to San Bernardino.
But the alliance's critic-in-chief, Republican frontrunner Donald Trump, calls NATO obsolete.
We're talking about tremendous amounts of money that we put in. Now we're defending countries, and we're not getting reimbursed anywhere near the cost of doing it. Either they pay up, including for past deficiencies, or they have to get out. And if it breaks up NATO, it breaks up NATO.
The U.S. does spend more on defense than its European or Asian partners. Only 5 of the 28 member nations pay a target 2% of their GDP into NATO defense spending. For post-Soviet bloc countries like Georgia vying to get into the group, NATO is essential to their survival and push to democracy.
NATO still does have very serious relevance because the challenges, security challenges, in the wake of the Cold War is multiplying, unfortunately. The world has become very dangerous, very unstable, less predictable.
The Secretary General declined to comment on Trump. Other topics from today's meeting included Europe's migrant and refugee crisis, Russia's involvement in Ukraine, and preparations for the July NATO summit in Poland. Brian?
Thanks, Lauren. Ashburn at the White House tonight. A priest kidnapped in Yemen is reportedly still alive. Crux reports the Indian government and the Vatican are working to free Father Tom Azunalil. He was kidnapped by militants during the attack that killed 4 nuns at a home for the elderly poor. One of the missionaries of charity who survived that attack blames Islamic terrorists. EWTN's foundress, the late Mother Angelica, is now laid to rest, but her life's impact remains strong among those who knew her personally. Dr. Scott Hahn joining us by Skype from Franciscan University in Steubenville, where he teaches theology. Scott, you were blessed to meet Mother before her stroke. Can you tell us what impact she had on your life and your mission?
Well, at that point in the 90s, I was embarking upon what John Paul called the new evangelization, not realizing what Mother Angelica was to become, literally the matriarch of the new evangelization. I did several shows with her, and I found her to be not only a lot of fun, but also very feisty, but fearless, precisely because she was so prayerful. She left an impression not only on her viewers, but I think especially on her guests. I really enjoyed the times that I had with her, especially one in particular where I got to talk to her the day after her healing. And you could tell in her eyes that she was really pleased with what Jesus had done after 40 years of wearing braces. And yet, she could tell that she didn't need the healing, that was really a sign of hope for other people. And so she said to me, you know, what form of suffering am I going to have now to give to Jesus? That kind of thing leaves an impression that it really goes deep.
You were attending the massive Christian burial for Mother along with so many others. Give us your reflections on that.
Well, I think it was a blessed moment for all of us. I got to spend some time with Archbishop Peter, who was gracious enough to preside. And what we did was to reflect upon this legacy and how we interacted with her over the years and how we just talked to people who had very similar experiences. I mentioned to him that I was reminded during the Mass of one of the shows that I did with her, where I went on and on about the relationship between the Old and the New Testament. And at the break, she turned to me and she said, "I think you're a modern day St. Paul." And I said, "Wow." And she said, "There's lots of things that he wrote I still don't understand."
A left-handed compliment. How do you see
Exactly.
Mother's legacy continuing and growing now after her death?
Well, you know, for the last 15 years, she suffered so much silently. And I honestly believe that she won inestimable graces, more than when she was hosting her own amazing program, perhaps. But I think from heaven now, she is going to be interceding on our behalf. We don't want to be presumptuous. We want to pray for her soul, of course. But at the same time, we don't want to be naive. I really believe that she has become a powerful intercessor for the Eternal Word television network and for the whole church throughout the whole world and the new evangelization. She may still prove to be the great matriarch even more.
And many of us share that belief. Dr. Scott Hahn, thank you so much for sharing your reflections on Mother Angelica.
Great to be with you, Brian.
It's good to see Scott. 48 years ago today, in the prime of his life, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was cut down by an assassin's bullet. He was in Memphis supporting a strike by sanitation workers when he was shot on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. King was rushed to the hospital and pronounced dead about an hour later. He was just 39 years old. James Earl Ray pleaded guilty to murder, then later recanted his confession, but was eventually convicted. Riots erupted in more than 100 U.S. cities in the days following Dr. King's death. Dr. Alveda King, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s niece, is Skyping with us from Atlanta. Dr. King, I had just turned 13 years old in 1968. I remember that day clearly. What do you remember of the day and the aftermath?
Brian, it was a tumultuous day. I was actually getting a dress made for an ROTC ball. And we had a call, and my father was in Memphis with his brother, and his brother had been shot. He rushed home to get his sister-in-law, and he came by our home also. And he told us what had happened. He consoled us. He went and got his sister-in-law and went to Memphis to get the body of his brother. The world was just stunned. We knew it could happen, but we never wanted it to happen. And so some say, come and let us slay the dreamer, and we'll kill the dream. But the good news is, to everyone who hears this today, the dream never died, and the dream really is still alive today.
How has your work with the civil rights movement led you to the work that you do with the pro-life movement?
Well, there's a voice today that is still not heard and who's not really defended. And it's the voice of the little baby in the womb and the decimation of the womb of the mother. Her health lately, we know now, is affected by abortion, just like the little baby in the womb is impacted by abortion. We have the sick and the elderly who are also victims of the end of their lives unjustly and unfairly. And so I believe by speaking out for those who cannot speak for themselves, I'm extending the message of the 20th century civil rights movement to the 21st century. A woman has a right to choose what she does with her body. The baby's not her body. Where's the lawyer for the baby? How can the dream survive if we murder our children and decimate the womb?
You are a powerful voice for life, and certainly your uncle was pro-life too, wasn't he?
My uncle was, my dad was. Sometimes the women in their lives, of course, wanted to be like Mrs. Barbara Bush and Mrs. Laura Bush, who are pro-choice, pro-abortion. Mrs. Coretta Scott King was, but her husband and my daddy and granddaddy, Daddy King, A.D. King, was staunchly pro-life.
Well, we're grateful that you are, and we appreciate your voice. Dr. Alveda King, thank you for joining us. Our condolences to you and your family.
Thank you so much.
Coming up, as Christians face persecution in Pakistan, churches try to defend themselves. And one of Mother Angelica's closest relatives shares her story. Morning Mass at the Vatican's Santa Marta residence, where the Pope lives, resumed today. Pope Francis preaching on the liturgical feast of the Annunciation, since the actual feast on March 25th fell on Good Friday this year. Thank you for joining us on this Monday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. People in Pakistan continue to remember the victims of the Easter Sunday bombing. They gathered for a candlelight vigil in Lahore yesterday. Muslims, Christians, and Hindus paid respects to the 75 people who died at a popular park. The suicide attack targeted Christians, but most of the victims were Muslim. Many churches in Pakistan now have armed security guards on duty. They're trying to protect Christians from further attacks. Church schools are also under threat. Some frightened children simply stay home. Minority rights activist Cecil Chaudhry blames Pakistan's biased laws for radicalization.
When you exclude the role of religious minorities from your textbooks, when you start putting material that is biased towards or discriminatory towards other faiths, so how will they actually respect minorities when they grow up?
Christians say their neighborhoods are often neglected. There are no paved roads or even running water. We continue tonight to celebrate EWTN foundress Mother Angelica, who died on Easter Sunday. Catherine Szeltner sits down tonight with one of Mother's few remaining living relatives.
We were all so proud of her. I mean, button-popping proud.
If the signature full face and love for storytelling doesn't give it away, Barbara Frances Houghton is closely related to Mother Angelica. First cousins, she grew up adoring then Sister Angelica in the Canton, Ohio convent.
And we would hold hands by clutching our fingers together through these bars. And that's how we, were able to show affection for each other.
She admired her cousin so much, the girl named Barbie wanted a nun doll.
I don't remember whether I asked for it for Christmas or just got it.
Houghton spent 20 years in Los Angeles working in broadcast and entertainment. One day in 1981, her cloistered cousin needed some unexpected advice.
She called me up and said, I'm going to start a television station. And I thought, well, how is she going to do this? But then I thought, if anybody can do it, she can.
And she did. As the network grew, Barbara said it became harder to stay in touch with Mother Angelica, but she never doubted their bond.
We, the family, she knew we were there for her, and we knew she was there for us.
The family was there for Mother Angelica a few days ago at her Huntsville, Alabama funeral.
That was very emotional. I guess in the back of your mind, you think someone like that is going to live forever. There was a lot of love. There was just, so much love in that shrine.
Even though it was a tough goodbye, Barbara believes her cousin is in good hands.
And we always said to her, God called her home, but he was up there bracing himself.
Catherine Szeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Oh, beautiful. She has Mother's sense of humor. Well, Mother Angelica not only founded EWTN, but also the Franciscan Missionaries of the Eternal Word. Our EWTN DC chaplain, Father Patrick, is Director of Priestly Formation for the congregation. How did Mother impact your own vocation, Father?
Brian, it was when I was a college student, actually. My family had gone up to Alabama from Florida, and it was Mother's great love, certainly for Jesus, and giving him the best. If you've been down to the shrine, or anyone who's been to the shrine knows, Mother she did not hold back. She gave it all, and that has had such an impact on so many people. Just the beauty of the church itself, the beauty of the liturgy, the Mass. And as at the Midnight Mass, the year 2000, shortly within about a year of the nuns moving in, that's really when I experienced the calling to the priesthood, to the religious life. And so it was Mother's great love for Jesus and the Mass that really touched my heart and really opened my heart to the call to the priesthood, which led, ultimately to joining the community of the friars that she had founded.
We are grateful for your yes and grateful for the service that you render us here at EWTN. You were at Mother's farewell. What can you share with us about that?
It was very moving over the course of the whole week, especially hearing my brother friars when they were preaching, those who especially had been in the community a little bit longer, who had been around Mother and had many memories to share. The funeral itself, I love Father Joseph in his homily had mentioned that her own profession was not the most edifying. And she mentioned all these things that seemed to be going wrong. But then Father Joseph, addressing Mother, said, we're making up for that now, Mother. We had 7 bishops, beautiful music with the canons of St. John Cantius, our cathedral choir, and others.
It was gorgeous.
It's a beautiful Mass.
Is there a particular memory that you'll always treasure, Mother?
When I entered the community, Mother had already had her stroke, so I didn't have many conversations with Mother, but several times I was able to certainly just to be with her, to hold her hand, and just the love that she poured, just by looking at you, holding your hand. And then as a priest, I will treasure the moments that I was able to have Mass for her in her room and give her Holy Communion.
You were blessed, and so was she. Father Patrick, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brian.
Up next, a unique view of the papacy from the Vatican's Archbishop Peter Wells. How the 3 most recent Holy Fathers affected the Church and the world. And sports agent Doug Eldridge discusses a new baseball season and tonight's NCAA championship game.
La strada che il Maestro risorto ci indica è a senso unico.
Pope Francis, speaking of the many faces of the mercy of God, celebrating Divine Mercy Sunday during this Jubilee Year of Mercy, Francis also announced a special collection April 24th in Europe for the victims of the conflict in Ukraine. Thanks for joining us on this Annunciation Monday. I'm Brian Patrick. The Vatican Secretariat of State is headquarters for its diplomats worldwide. Archbishop Peter Wells has worked there for 14 years. He now goes to South Africa to be the nuncio there. He talked with our Mary Shovelin in Rome about the diplomatic impact of John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and now Pope Francis.
I think that, first of all, John Paul II, as a diplomat, he was extraordinary, and we all saw his ability, especially coming from the former Eastern Bloc, and the way he interacted in the entire world stage, and very much a part of the fall of the Eastern Bloc. Secondly, Benedict was extraordinary. I think one of the great contributions that he brought diplomatically was he continued to talk about the importance of the relationship between faith and reason again and again, and also to speak of the importance for the religious communities to always have a voice in the public forum.
And now, Francis, how would you, I mean, it's a young papacy, as we know. John Paul, of course, almost, I think, 26 years, and Benedict's was 7. But this one's only 3 years old, let's say. But he's, again, affected so many people throughout the world. If you had to summarize his diplomatic touch, just
look at the impact
yeah.
That Pope Francis has already had in 3 years. I mean, it is extraordinary what he has been able to do, from Cuba to what he has done regarding bringing this whole plight of immigration and the problem that we're facing right now throughout the world with levels of insecurity, what he's voiced many times as a third world war in pieces. He has a keen sense of what is happening, but he never, ever loses the idea that it is the human person who is at the center.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about your faith life. How do you stay grounded in a job that for any priest, bishop, or cardinal even could make one become more of a CEO, just an administrator?
For one thing, I really hate it when people talk about priests who are working in the Vatican, and people who are in my type of job, as bureaucrats or CEOs. We are not. We're priests. We're ministers first and foremost. We are doing ministry here. It may be a more indirect ministry, and it is behind the scenes, but it is helping the Holy Father as the vicar of Christ in his ministry. And if you lose touch with that, you better get out of there quick, because you need to get yourself grounded again.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. God bless.
And turning to sports, the men's NCAA basketball championship game is tonight, followed by the women tomorrow. And baseball's new season is underway, with the Royals beating the Mets on opening day. Sports agent Doug Eldridge with the DLE agency is with us. So many tournament favorites were out early this year. Does anybody have an intact bracket tonight?
You know, it's funny you ask that, because of the 13 million or so brackets that were filled out on ESPN, 0.009% accurately picked that Final Four. So there are some, but probably only technically.
Who do you like then? Villanova?
Dramatic pause. I know who you want me to pick. I'm going to go with UNC, and it's going to be
North
experience.
Carolina.
First of all, Villanova shot lights out, over 70% in that Final Four game. We were joking earlier, it was like the Washington Generals and the Harlem Globetrotters. They've consistently shot over 58% throughout the tournament, which is borderline historic, but I think they're going to come up against a much better front court in UNC and better guard play, who knows how to slow down the tempo. Villanova up to this point has been shooting well, but they've also taken good shots, and I think UNC is going to eliminate the latter. I'm taking UNC. I believe the last line was 2 points. Bottom line, it's going to be a close game.
North Carolina has a great tradition. The UConn women, 75 wins in a row. Can anybody take them down tomorrow night?
You know, that's a story in of itself. I had the privilege of going to school with the great Kara Lawson. She was a couple years behind me. Fantastic Tennessee guard at the height of the Pat Summitt era. And she's now an ESPN analyst, and she said, you know, I think this is probably the best women's team and arguably one of the best teams, period, that we've ever seen. And what's unique about that, Brian, is if this was on the men's side with the 1 year rule, right, on the men's, you have to have 1 calendar year before you're NBA eligible. We'll never see a dynasty like this with 4 potential national championships, let alone the wooden era, right, the golden era. So this is truly significant. It's one thing to win 75 regular season games. It's another thing to stack up consecutive national titles. This is truly historic.
They're going to do it tonight?
I think UConn will do it, yes, tomorrow night.
So the baseball season began this weekend. Do you think it's kind of fading into the past, or is it going to be still America's great pastime?
I don't think it's fading. I think others are just moving at a quicker pace. And to that's what really leads me to the quote-unquote fix for MLB. It's pace and personality, right? In the SportsCenter highlight era and the 140-character journalist, the slow 3.5-hour, 4-hour pace of baseball doesn't lend itself to that. It's hard to adjust the pace via rule changes without changing the game itself. But what you can do, and Bryce Harper alluded to that recently here in the Washington Post, is allow the personalities to draw out. Because fans don't cheer for teams as much now as they do for players, and players are defined by personalities. If you want MLB to step up to the plate, so to speak, allow the personalities to shine.
Thank you, Doug Eldridge, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Brian Patrick. Good night. God bless you.